one guy who didn't talk to you, of course, is Iverson.
Right.
I don't know if you expected that to happen.
I did.
You didn't expect him to talk.
I expected he would not
Right.
talk.
What's your sense of, I mean, he's had the film comes out at a time when he's had an incredibly tumultuous year. I mean, he went back to the Sixers, but then he had to basically retire. His daughter has ill health. He's had gambling. He's talked about gambling.
His wife is divorcing him.
So he's had a lot going on.
Yeah.
Do you think about him watching the movie? Do you worry about that? Wonder about it?
I don't worry about it. I do think about him watching it. I think he'll like the film, frankly, because if there's one thing about Allen Iverson, people are very divided about him, and it started when he was 17, and you see that in this film, and it has been that way for the next 17, 18 years of his life up till today, and he is a divisive figure, but the one thing that I've always really admired about him is that he seems so authentic and real, and he wears his emotions very much outwardly. He's not an athlete like so many of them are now, that everything is sort of packaged and controlled, and it's just coach speak when they get in front of a microphone
until
or camera.
the text messages come out.
Yeah, exactly, right.
I like him, and I'm not the white guy saying it so I don't appear racist or anything.
Right.
I like him. He comes across in the film as a likable. I mean, he worked. There's a great, I don't know if it was in that clip, but there's a great quote from some guy who compares him to the smallest nail in the toolbox.
Right.
You can't bend him. He's a nail. I mean, he played as hard as anybody ever played.
Right.
And your dad liked him for the same reasons, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think this film has a personal aspect. You get a sense of that from what you saw. And I felt like it was really important to try and tell this story from my point of view as someone who grew up there, as someone who played basketball in high school there, and who averaged about 23 points less a game than Allen Iverson.
But that's still pretty good.
Well, he averaged over 30, so I
you had
wasn't doing too
11
bad.
or something.
Yeah,
And they only scored like 12 points in high school
11.6. One of the things that I wanted to get into the film was that race is a complicated thing, even within a family. My mom, you find out in the film, was someone who was the first school nurse when they integrated one of the black high schools. She went to that high school. No other white nurse wanted to go there. Now, my mom is not a civil rights advocate at all, but she went there. She was profoundly affected by it. Now, you would think in the Hollywood version that when the Allen Iverson incident happened, she would be sort of pro-Allen Iverson. She felt like he needed to be punished. She felt like he did something wrong. She believed he was guilty. He needed to be punished. My dad, on the other hand, conservative, Republican, all his life, but a huge sports fan and an athlete in his own right, a tremendous athlete in his youth. When this incident happened, he disagreed with my mom. He said, I think they're going after this kid. I think they're treating him unfairly, and I think they're putting his risk at future, which was what a lot of the people in the black community felt. So even within my own family, there were these different views, and views you wouldn't have necessarily expected from knowing these two people. And I think that's the thing about race is that it is complicated. And I think one of the things that, if we want to be able to talk about race, one of the first things I think that needs to happen is that people have to feel like they can be honest about their feelings about it, even to the point of expressing their prejudices, and not feel like by expressing those prejudices, they're going to be written off as being, okay, well, I can't listen to you anymore.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the film is that you had once believed that sports was kind of, not the great equalizer, but the place where...
The common ground.
Yeah, common ground. But as you look back, you see that's not always the case. I mean, where do you stand now? Can you go to a game, you can go to an Oak Park High School game and say, yeah, this is a community, and this is where people still come together that might not otherwise mingle?
Yeah, again, I mean, I'm the guy that sort of sees everything in gray, I guess. But it's like, I think sports clearly was, by playing basketball and having black teammates, it definitely had an impact on me in the way I looked at race. There's no question it did. But I think sometimes we overstate the value of that. And even I felt that I had overstayed the value, and I talk about this in the film, that by having black teammates, somehow I knew black people in a way that I really didn't, because they never came to my home. I never went to their home. We never went to parties together. Of course, I never went to parties, period, so that's part of it. But it was, we were teammates, we weren't friends. And I think a lot of times we have a tendency to think of sports as this great equalizer or this great boost for integration. And frankly, it is to some degree, but there are limits to that. And it's why a lot of white people could go cheer for Allen Iverson when he was a star before the bowling alley, and after the bowling alley kind of turn against him because he now fit certain stereotypes in their mind that they had about young black men, that he was a thug, that he was no good, that he was using sports to get away with whatever he could, and they didn't want to see that happen.
You've said in the past that if there was a common link between your films, that it was one about people's and families' dreams. Do you see this film as fitting into that in any way?
Well, I do in a way. I think if I had had access to Allen Iverson and his mother and been able to interview them for this film, I think that would have been able to be a stronger theme. But it's certainly clear that for Allen Iverson, the pursuit of sports and basketball was, his way out and a way of helping his family and particularly his mother. I mean, he came from a very dysfunctional background. I mean, he had a mother who was in the streets, who was using drugs,
When she was 15.
When she was 15, when she had him.
Yeah.
I mean, Allen at the age of 8 was looking after his 4-year-old sister.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you a lot. And so, and I think for Allen, like a lot of kids in that situation, he probably had this deep hope that basketball could repair his family too. Not just help them out of poverty, but repair the dysfunction of that family. And I'm reading that into from making the film. It's not from having a conversation with him,
Sure.
but I would bet that that's what was going on.
The other thing that comes up in your films over and over again is a system that breaks down. You could say Hoop Dreams was that. The system of bringing these kids up to then go on to the pros. Well, obviously, that didn't happen for the two main characters. It doesn't happen to thousands and thousands of kids. At the Death House Door is about kind of the death row justice system breaking down. The movie Stevie that you made about going back to visit your old, little brother from the Big Brother, Big Sister program was about how maybe that program had broken down, how foster care.
Right, the system failed him.
What is it about? Do you go into it thinking, I'm going to make a movie about a system breaking down?
No.
No.
I guess there's just a lot of systems breaking down. But no, I really start with a story. I'm interested in a story and in people whose stories are interesting to me, and then I guess what it is that I find as I go along, particularly in the making of the film, that part of what interested me about them is that their lives, I think, have something larger to say than just being an entertaining life. That there's something at work there in their lives that says something about the world we live in. And so I think those are the stories I'm attracted to, but I don't start out saying, gee, I'd like to make a film about racism, or I'd like to make a film about the failure of the foster care and social service system. I start with, gee, it would be interesting to go back and see my little brother from 10 years ago that I've lost contact with and sort of see where he's at now and kind of revisit the kid that I knew at 14 when I left and the young man at 24 now. But then it became about all
Right.
of those
I mean, and
other
that is a
things.
brutal movie, and one of the things that comes up in that film again and again is your guilt. Are you making this movie, are you visiting him because you want to visit him, or are you visiting him because you want to make a movie?
Right.
To some extent, does that guilt come up in any project you take on, any documentary project you take on?
Well, I mean, in Stevie, I made it overt and part of the film because it seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like the most honest thing to do. And I don't think I'll ever make a film more honest than Stevie. I mean, I don't want to make a film more honest than Stevie. But I think that certain films make certain demands. This film, I think, demanded that it be personal. And it's not as personal in that kind of heart-wrenching way that Stevie is, but I felt like it needed to be personal, partly because of what Joyce Hobson, the African-American activist, says to me that you mentioned earlier, which is, she had dodged me forever, for a year, and I kept chasing her to be in this film because I thought it was important. When she finally agreed, I said on camera, it's in the film, I say, tell me why you didn't want to be in this. And she says, because you're white, and I feel like this is a black story that needs to be told from a black perspective. And my response is, that's why I'm making it personal, because I'm a white guy from this community. And so I think it's important that people know who I am trying to tell this story. And so I think certain films make those demands, and some it's more background. But I think every documentary filmmaker who's thoughtful struggles with the issue of, am I just putting people's lives on display, who are suffering in some way or have tragic dimensions in some way? I think every film, and anytime a filmmaker tells you that I don't worry about that, then I worry more about that filmmaker, frankly.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you always want to feel like you're a human being and having a relationship with your subject, not just a filmmaker documenting their lives.